Some of the women thought the bathhouse would be the place where they lost the last piece of themselves. Texas, July 1944. The afternoon heat pressed down like a heavy blanket over the prisoner camp. Dust drifted across the hard-packed ground. Somewhere beyond the fences, cicadas sang in the mesquite trees. The sound never seemed to stop. 100 German women stood in silence beside a row of military trucks, their gray uniforms darkened by sweat from another day beneath the relentless southern sun. None of them knew exactly why they had been called from their barracks. None of them asked. After months of captivity, questions often went unanswered. Orders did not. Anna Fisher stood near the middle of the group. At 26 years old, she had once worked as a nurse in a hospital outside Hamburg. Before the war, her days had been filled with white sheets, polished floors, and the quiet rhythm of helping people recover. Now her world was made of fences, guard towers, and uncertainty. She adjusted the collar of her uniform and watched as one of the American guards unfolded a piece of paper. The camp loudspeaker crackled. A short announcement followed. The women were being transported to the central bathhouse facility. The reaction was immediate, though few spoke above a whisper. Heads turned. Eyes widened. A murmur spread through the crowd like wind moving through dry grass. Anna felt her stomach tighten. The bathhouse. She had heard stories. Every prisoner had. Stories passed from camp to camp. Stories whispered late at night, when lights were out and sleep refused to come. Some stories contradicted each other. Others grew larger with each retelling. But they all shared one thing: fear. An older woman named Marta stood a few feet away. Her face had become lined long before age should have marked it. She leaned closer to another prisoner and spoke softly in German. Anna caught only fragments. Humiliation. Inspection. No privacy. The younger women listened without interrupting. Nobody knew what was true, yet uncertainty often felt worse than certainty. The guards motioned toward the trucks. One by one, the women climbed aboard. Wooden benches lined the sides. The engines rumbled to life. Dust rose behind the convoy as it rolled across the camp. Anna sat quietly near the rear of the truck. Around her, conversations faded. Most simply stared ahead. The landscape moved slowly beyond the wooden rails. Barracks, storage sheds, water towers, long stretches of sunburned earth. Then she saw it. The bathhouse stood near the edge of the campgrounds. Larger than she expected. Built from pale brick. Wide windows reflected the afternoon sunlight. Pipes rose from the roof. Thin streams of steam drifted into the sky. The truck stopped. The engines fell silent. For several seconds nobody moved. The women remained seated, watching, waiting. Anna stepped down onto the ground and looked at the building. It appeared ordinary, almost peaceful, yet fear lingered among the group. She could feel it without anyone speaking. 100 women stood facing the structure. The heat shimmered above the dirt. A distant flag snapped in the breeze. Somewhere, a screen door closed with a hollow clap. Then 6 American soldiers appeared from around the side of the building. Their uniforms were clean despite the dust. Their expressions revealed nothing. The women watched them carefully. The soldiers stopped near the entrance. For a long moment, nobody said a word. Anna noticed the man standing at the center. Tall, broad shoulders. Sergeant William Carter. She did not know his name yet. She only noticed the way he studied the crowd before looking toward the bathhouse doors. Whatever was about to happen next, every woman standing there believed it would be remembered for the rest of her life. The 6 soldiers remained motionless beside the entrance. The silence unsettled the women more than shouting ever could have. Anna Fisher stood among the crowd and watched the tall sergeant at the center. The afternoon sun reflected from the brass button on his uniform. Sweat rolled down the side of her neck, but she barely noticed it. Around her, quiet conversations returned in nervous whispers. Marta folded her arms tightly across her chest. "Something is wrong," she murmured. "They would not bring 100 women here for nothing." Several heads nodded. No one challenged the thought. Fear had a way of spreading when people knew too little. The bathhouse stood before them like a question nobody could answer. Its brick walls looked clean. Its windows reflected the bright Texas sky. Thin streams of steam drifted upward from the roof vents. From somewhere inside came the distant sound of running water. The sound should have been comforting. Instead, it seemed to deepen the uncertainty. Anna remembered stories told during the long months since her capture. Stories traded between prisoners during meals, during work details, during sleepless nights. Some came from people who claimed they had seen things themselves. Others came from someone who knew someone else. None could be verified, yet the stories remained. Human beings often held on to rumors when facts were unavailable. She remembered one woman insisting that bathhouses were places where prisoners lost their privacy. Another claimed inspections took place before anyone entered. Another swore that Americans treated prisoners differently from camp to camp, depending on the commander. The details never matched. The fear always did. A warm breeze crossed the yard, carrying the smell of soap and fresh lumber. Anna glanced toward the soldiers again. They did not appear threatening. They did not appear friendly either. They simply waited. That uncertainty made them difficult to understand. One of the younger prisoners shifted nervously beside her. "Why are they watching us?" she whispered. Anna did not answer because she did not know. The question hung in the air. Nearby, another woman quietly removed her glasses and cleaned them with trembling fingers. Several stared at the ground. Others stared directly at the bathhouse doors. Nobody moved toward the entrance. Time seemed to stretch. A minute felt like 10. Then Sergeant William Carter stepped forward. The movement immediately drew every eye. He removed a folded envelope from his pocket. The paper looked ordinary. Nothing about it seemed important. Yet the expression on his face changed as he read the contents. Not dramatically, not enough for most people to notice. But Anna noticed. Nurses learned to observe small things. A patient's breathing, a slight movement of the eyes, the subtle signs that revealed what words often concealed. Carter folded the paper again and slipped it back into his pocket. For several seconds he said nothing. The women waited. The other 5 soldiers waited. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then the sergeant looked toward his men and gave a short instruction. His voice was calm, almost casual. Anna could not hear every word from where she stood. But whatever he said caused all 5 soldiers to exchange brief glances. None objected. None hesitated. They simply nodded. And in that moment, although no prisoner knew it yet, the afternoon began moving in a direction none of them expected. For a moment, nothing happened. The 6 soldiers simply stood there beneath the afternoon sun while 100 women watched in silence. Then Sergeant William Carter turned away from the bathhouse entrance. Not a step to the left, not a step to the right. He turned completely around until his back faced the building. The movement was so unexpected that several prisoners exchanged confused looks. A second later, the other 5 soldiers did the same. Robert Hayes turned. Thomas Walker turned. James Sullivan turned. Richard Bennett turned. Edward Brooks turned. 6 uniforms. 6 backs facing the bathhouse. No explanation. No speech. No warning. Just a simple action. Anna Fisher frowned slightly. She had expected orders. She had expected instructions. Instead, she found herself staring at 6 motionless men looking toward an empty stretch of dusty Texas ground. The silence deepened. Even Marta seemed unsure what to say. The women waited for the next step. Surely there would be one. Surely this was only the beginning of some procedure they did not understand. But the next step never came. Carter removed his cap and wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. Then he pointed toward one of the side walls of the bathhouse. Robert Hayes immediately walked in that direction. A few moments later, he returned carrying several folded canvas tarps. Thomas Walker and James Sullivan joined him. Together, they moved along the exterior wall. Anna watched carefully. The men stretched canvas across several high windows. They secured each corner with ropes and wooden pegs. Another soldier inspected the edges, adjusting gaps no wider than a finger. The work was deliberate, precise, methodical. No one rushed. No one joked. No one appeared irritated by the heat. More canvas followed. Another window disappeared. Then another. The women continued watching. Confusion slowly replaced fear. Marta squinted toward the building. "What are they doing?" she asked quietly. No one answered. Anna did not know either. Yet she could see something unusual unfolding. The soldiers were not preparing the women for inspection. They were preparing the building itself. Richard Bennett walked the perimeter, stopping occasionally to examine a door frame or vent opening. When he found a small gap between 2 wooden panels, he fetched additional material and covered it. Edward Brooks checked the rear entrance, then checked it again. The entire process seemed focused on one thing and one thing only, making sure nobody could see inside. The realization arrived gradually. Anna felt it before she fully understood it. Nearby, a younger prisoner lowered her eyes and took a slow breath. Another woman relaxed her shoulders for the first time since arriving. The atmosphere around the group began to shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to notice. The soldiers never looked toward the women. They concentrated only on their work. Dust drifted across the yard. Steam continued rising from the roof vents. The smell of soap lingered in the warm air. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes, Carter walked the entire perimeter himself. He examined every window, every doorway, every corner. Then he returned to his position near the entrance. He glanced once toward the building, once toward his men. Then he nodded. A small gesture, barely noticeable. Yet something about it told Anna that whatever task had been assigned was now complete. And for the first time that afternoon, the fear she had carried from the trucks to the bathhouse began to loosen its grip. The nod from Sergeant William Carter seemed almost insignificant, yet every woman standing in the yard noticed it. The work was finished. The preparations were complete. Still, nobody moved. The bathhouse doors remained closed. The soldiers remained quiet. The afternoon sun hung low enough to cast long shadows across the ground. Anna Fisher listened to the distant hum of cicadas and the faint rush of water somewhere inside the building. The sound no longer felt threatening. It felt strangely ordinary. Carter stepped toward the entrance and opened one of the doors. A wave of warm air drifted out. It carried the scent of soap, clean towels, and freshly scrubbed wood. Nothing else. No shouting. No commands. No inspection line. No crowd of waiting personnel. Just the simple smell of cleanliness. He looked toward the women and spoke through an interpreter standing nearby. His words were brief. The bathhouse was ready. Small groups could enter whenever they wished. Nobody would be rushed. Nobody would be forced. The interpreter repeated every sentence in German. A strange silence followed. Many of the women had prepared themselves for discomfort. Some had prepared themselves for embarrassment. None had prepared themselves for choice. Choice had become a rare thing during the war. Anna noticed several women glance at one another as if waiting for someone else to make the first decision. No one volunteered. The uncertainty remained. Then Marta surprised everyone. The older woman who had spent the afternoon expecting the worst took a single step forward. Then another. She stopped near the entrance and looked inside. Her shoulders remained tense. Her hands remained clasped together. For several seconds, she simply stood there, watching, listening. Finally, she disappeared through the doorway. The door swung gently behind her. The women waited. A minute passed. Then another. Nobody emerged. Nobody called for help. Nobody raised their voice. The only sound was the steady whisper of water moving through pipes. Anna found herself staring at the doorway. Her heart still beat faster than normal. Yet the fear that had accompanied her from the trucks was becoming harder to hold on to. Around her, other women seemed to feel the same shift. The atmosphere had changed. Not because anyone had delivered a speech. Not because anyone had offered reassurance. The change came from small details. The covered windows. The guarded entrances. The quiet professionalism of the 6 soldiers. Actions carried more weight than promises. Suddenly the door opened again. Marta stepped outside. Sunlight touched her face. For a moment, she simply stood there looking at the yard. Then something remarkable happened. She smiled. It was not a broad smile. It was not dramatic. It was the kind of smile people wear when they discover they were wrong about something important. Several women immediately moved closer. Questions followed. Marta answered quietly. Anna could not hear every word. She did not need to. The expressions on the faces around her told the story. Confusion gave way to relief. Relief gave way to disbelief. One by one, women began walking toward the entrance. Some moved quickly. Others moved cautiously. Anna remained where she was for a few moments longer. She looked toward the 6 soldiers. They still stood with their backs turned toward the building. The Texas breeze stirred the edges of the canvas coverings. Dust drifted across the yard. Carter never looked toward the doorway. Not once. Anna watched him for several seconds. Then she took a slow breath and started walking toward the bathhouse. Anna crossed the threshold slowly. The heavy wooden door closed behind her with a soft sound that seemed to separate 2 different worlds. For a moment, she simply stood still. Warm air wrapped around her. Steam drifted gently beneath the ceiling beams. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, softened by the canvas coverings outside. The light no longer felt harsh. It spread across the room in pale golden bands that reflected from clean tile floors and polished metal fixtures. Anna looked around carefully. Rows of folded white towels rested on wooden shelves. Bars of soap sat beside enamel wash basins. Fresh water flowed steadily from pipes that looked newly maintained. Everything smelled clean. Not luxurious. Not extravagant. Simply clean. After months of uncertainty, that alone felt remarkable. Other women entered behind her. Their footsteps echoed softly across the floor. Some glanced around in disbelief. Others touched the towels as though they expected them to disappear. Nobody rushed. Nobody spoke loudly. The atmosphere carried the strange calm that follows a storm which never arrives. Anna walked farther into the room. Along one wall, she noticed several handwritten signs in English and German. The translations were careful, though imperfect. One sign explained where fresh towels could be found. Another pointed toward hot water controls. A third requested that everyone take their time because there was no schedule to rush them. Anna read the words twice. No schedule. No hurry. She could hardly remember the last time anyone had offered patience instead of orders. Near the center of the room, Marta stood holding a towel against her chest. Her eyes looked brighter than they had outside. She caught Anna's gaze and gave a small nod. It was enough. No explanation was necessary. Across the room, several younger women quietly laughed. The sound startled Anna because she had not heard laughter from them in weeks. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was simply the sound of people discovering that fear had been unnecessary. The steady flow of water filled the silence between conversations. Somewhere a faucet clicked open. Somewhere else a woman thanked another for helping her find extra soap. Ordinary sounds. Everyday sounds. Yet inside the camp, they felt almost extraordinary. Anna moved toward one of the windows. The canvas covering blocked any view from outside. She examined the edges carefully. There were no gaps. No openings. No careless mistakes. Whoever had installed the coverings had checked every detail. She remembered the soldiers working beneath the afternoon sun. The ropes. The wooden pegs. The careful inspections. At the time, she had not understood what she was witnessing. Now she did. They had not been preparing a building. They had been protecting peace of mind. Anna rested her hand against the cool brick wall and closed her eyes for a moment. The sound of water continued around her. Steam drifted upward. Sunlight glowed softly through the covered windows. Outside, beyond the walls, the camp still existed. The fences still stood. The guard towers still cast their shadows across the Texas dirt. Yet inside this room something felt different. Not freedom. Not comfort. Something smaller and somehow more powerful. For the first time since her capture, Anna felt that someone had remembered the difference between controlling people and respecting them. Time moved differently inside the building. Outside, the Texas afternoon continued its slow march toward evening. Inside, the women seemed to rediscover small pieces of normal life that war had scattered across continents. Anna Fisher sat on a wooden bench near the wall, holding a clean towel in her hands. The fabric smelled faintly of soap and sunshine. Such a simple thing. Yet she could not remember the last time a simple thing had felt important. Around her, conversations grew easier. Voices no longer carried the sharp edge of anxiety that had filled the truck ride earlier that day. Marta sat nearby speaking with two younger women from Cologne. Their discussion had nothing to do with camps or war. They were debating the best recipe for potato soup. The topic was ordinary enough to make Anna smile. For months, every conversation had eventually returned to uncertainty. Today, for a little while, uncertainty seemed farther away. The sound of running water continued through the room. Steam drifted lazily beneath the rafters. Sunlight shifted across the tiled floor as the afternoon wore on. Every detail felt calm, deliberately calm. Anna found herself wondering who had planned all of this. Someone had ordered fresh towels. Someone had ensured the water system worked properly. Someone had translated the signs into German. Someone had decided that patience mattered. These things did not happen by accident. Across the room, a young prisoner named Elise discovered a basket filled with combs. The finding produced another round of surprised laughter. Several women gathered around. They began helping one another tidy their hair. The scene reminded Anna of hospital dormitories before the war, when nurses prepared for evening shifts and shared stories from home. The memory arrived unexpectedly. For a moment, she could almost hear her younger brother playing piano in the family apartment. She could almost smell her mother's coffee. Then the memory faded, leaving behind something softer than sadness. Gratitude. Not for the war. Not for captivity. Gratitude for being reminded that normal life still existed somewhere beneath the exhaustion. Eventually, Anna rose and walked toward the entrance corridor. As she approached the door, she noticed something she had missed earlier. Mounted beside the exit was a freshly painted wooden sign. The lettering was simple, nothing decorative, nothing dramatic. The message appeared in both English and German. She stopped and read it slowly. Privacy first. Beneath those two words was a second sentence. You are prisoners of war. You are still human beings. Anna stared at the sign for several seconds. Around her, footsteps continued. Water continued flowing. Conversations continued. Yet the room suddenly felt quieter. Not because the sounds disappeared, but because the meaning of the afternoon finally settled into place. Nobody inside had been given special treatment. Nobody had been promised freedom. The women would still return to their barracks when the day ended. The fences would still be there tomorrow morning. But someone had chosen to protect their dignity when it would have been easier not to think about it at all. Anna glanced toward the doorway leading outside. Beyond it stood 6 soldiers beneath the fading Texas sun. They had guarded a building all afternoon. Yet somehow their most important act had been the decision to look away. When the first group finally stepped back outside, the light had changed. The hard glare of late afternoon had softened into the golden color that settled across Texas fields before sunset. Long shadows stretched across the campyard. The air remained warm, but the heat no longer felt oppressive. Anna Fisher paused near the doorway and looked around. Something was different. Not in the camp itself. The fences remained exactly where they had been. The guard towers still overlooked the grounds. The trucks still sat parked near the road. Yet the women emerging from the building carried themselves differently. Their shoulders seemed lighter. Their faces seemed calmer. One by one they joined small groups near the entrance, speaking quietly among themselves. The conversations no longer revolved around fear. They revolved around surprise. Marta sat on a wooden crate beneath a patch of shade. 2 younger women listened as she spoke. Anna heard fragments as she walked past. Clean towels. Hot water. Respect. The same words appeared again and again. It was as though everyone had witnessed the same event, but still struggled to explain why it mattered so much. Across the yard, Sergeant William Carter and his men remained at their posts. They had spent hours standing beneath the sun. Dust covered their boots. Sweat darkened their collars. Yet none of them appeared eager for recognition. Robert Hayes leaned against a fence post while Thomas Walker drank from a canteen. James Sullivan adjusted one of the canvas coverings that had loosened in the breeze. The work continued even though most of the women had already entered and exited the building. Anna noticed something else. Several prisoners glanced toward the soldiers as they passed. Not with fear, not with suspicion, simply with curiosity. Earlier that day, the 6 men had seemed like distant authority figures. Now they seemed like ordinary people carrying out a task they believed was important. The change was subtle, yet it felt significant. As evening approached, more women completed their turn inside. The atmosphere around the bathhouse grew unexpectedly peaceful. Laughter occasionally drifted through the air. Someone began humming a familiar German folk song. Another joined in. The melody floated briefly above the sounds of the camp before fading into the breeze. Anna found herself smiling again. She had not expected that. For a long time, she had measured days by survival alone. Wake up. Follow orders. Wait for the next uncertainty. Today had interrupted that rhythm. Not with a grand gesture. Not with a life-changing announcement. With something much smaller. Someone had taken the time to consider how strangers might feel. The realization stayed with her. Near sunset, Carter finally turned toward the building for the first time all afternoon. His shift was ending. The last groups were finishing inside. He exchanged a few quiet words with his men and glanced across the yard to ensure everything remained orderly. His eyes briefly passed over the gathering of women. Nothing more. No expectation. No acknowledgement that anything unusual had occurred. Then he looked away again. Anna watched him for a moment. The simplicity of it struck her. The soldiers had never asked for gratitude. They had never asked to be remembered. They had simply chosen decency when nobody required it. And sometimes, she realized, those were the choices people remembered longest. The trucks returned after sunset. Their engines rumbled softly in the gathering darkness as groups of women climbed aboard for the ride back to the barracks. The sky above Texas glowed deep orange near the horizon before fading into violet. A few stars appeared overhead. The heat of the day finally began to loosen its grip on the land. Anna Fisher sat near the rear of one truck and watched the bathhouse disappear behind them. Nobody spoke much during the drive. The silence felt different now. Earlier it had been filled with tension. Now it felt thoughtful, reflective, as though everyone was carrying home the same question. How could such a small act matter so much? The convoy rolled past storage buildings and fence compounds. Floodlights flickered on across the camp. Somewhere in the distance, a radio played faint American music. The melody drifted through the evening air before disappearing again. When the women reached their barracks, conversations immediately began. Not loud conversations, not excited ones. Quiet conversations. The kind people have when they are trying to understand something meaningful. Marta sat on the edge of her bunk and repeated the story to several women who had entered later in the afternoon. Others described the signs on the walls. The fresh towels, the covered windows, the patients. Every account sounded almost identical because the details had been impossible to miss. Anna listened from her bunk near the window. Outside, crickets had replaced the cicadas. The camp felt calmer than usual. One woman admitted she had expected humiliation. Another confessed she had spent the entire truck ride preparing herself for disappointment. Several nodded in agreement. No one seemed embarrassed by those admissions. Fear often loses its power once spoken aloud. As darkness settled fully across the compound, the conversation shifted. The women no longer discussed the building itself. They discussed the soldiers. Not their ranks. Not their uniforms. Their choices. Robert Hayes checking every window. Thomas Walker securing ropes beneath the sun. James Sullivan adjusting loose canvas even after the work was finished. Sergeant William Carter standing guard without ever demanding recognition. Small actions. Ordinary actions. Yet together they formed something larger. Anna eventually rose and walked to the window. Beyond the fence, she could see distant camp lights glowing against the night. Somewhere beyond those lights stood 6 men finishing their shifts. They would likely eat supper, write letters home, and prepare for another day. They probably did not realize an entire barracks was discussing them. They probably never would. Anna rested her hand against the wooden frame and looked toward the stars. She thought about the stories she had believed before arriving in America. Stories built on fear. Stories built on assumptions. Some had proven true. Many had not. Reality, she was learning, rarely fit neatly into the categories people created during war. Sometimes the most important moments arrive quietly. A covered window. A respectful distance. A choice to protect dignity when nobody was watching. Long after the conversations faded and the lights inside the barracks went dark, Anna remained awake for a while. The camp was still a prison camp. Tomorrow would bring the same routines, the same fences, the same uncertainty about the future. Yet one thing had changed. Earlier that morning she had looked at the guards and seen only authority. Tonight she looked back on the day and saw something else. Human beings choosing to act with decency when they easily could have chosen convenience instead. More than 40 years later, Anna Fisher sat beside a window in a small house overlooking a quiet street. The war had long since become history. The camps were gone. The uniforms were gone. The fences existed only in photographs stored inside old albums and fading archives. Outside her window, children rode bicycles beneath summer sunlight. A lawn mower hummed somewhere down the block. The ordinary sounds of peace filled the afternoon. A granddaughter sat across from her at the kitchen table, working on a school project about the war. Papers were scattered beside a cup of tea. Questions filled a notebook. Anna answered most of them easily. Dates, places, names. The facts remained clear enough. Yet the longer the conversation continued, the more she realized how much of history had slipped away. Certain camp numbers no longer came to mind. The exact dates of transfers had blurred together. Entire months had faded into uncertainty. Time had carried many things away. Then her granddaughter asked a simple question. What do you remember most? Anna looked toward the window. For several seconds, she said nothing. The answer surprised even her. She did not remember the trucks. She did not remember the schedules. She did not remember the endless waiting that had defined so many days. Instead, her thoughts returned to one afternoon in Texas. To a brick building. To steam rising into warm air. To 6 soldiers standing beneath the sun. She remembered the fear. She remembered the rumors. She remembered 100 women preparing themselves for disappointment. Most of all, she remembered discovering that the disappointment never came. Her granddaughter waited patiently. Finally, Anna smiled and began telling the story. Not as a dramatic event, not as a turning point in the war, simply as a memory. She described the covered windows, the clean towels, the handwritten signs, the soldiers who spent an entire afternoon protecting the privacy of people they did not know. She described Sergeant William Carter turning his back toward the building and remaining there without complaint. She described the realization that dignity could survive even in difficult circumstances when someone chose to defend it. When she finished, the room grew quiet. Her granddaughter lowered her pencil. "That is what you remember?" she asked softly. Anna nodded. Yes. The answer seemed almost too simple. Yet it was true. History often celebrated grand victories and famous names. But the moments that remained in memory were frequently smaller. A door held open. A kind word. A gesture of respect. The afternoon sunlight shifted across the kitchen table. Anna looked outside once more. The world had changed beyond anything she could have imagined in 1944. Yet the lesson from that day remained unchanged. People rarely remembered every rule. They rarely remembered every order. They remembered how they were treated. They remembered who protected their dignity when it would have been easier not to care. Long after the details disappeared, that memory endured. 6 men had guarded a building for a few hours. What they truly protected lasted a lifetime. They never asked to be remembered, yet they were.